Has anyone heard that expression? The public, it's not in the public interest, right? Which is something that everyone hides behind. A good example of this would be a video which I did see, someone directed me towards it, where there's a policeman and there's tons of this stuff sitting on top of a woman in a police station, just viciously bashing her in the head. Has anyone seen that?
Yes.
Right. Well, it's pretty obvious that the cop did it, right?
Well,
you know?
it's all over Facebook.
Right. So what happens there? You know, you can argy-bargy on trying to stop that video being presented in court as evidence before a judge. You could try that tack. This is what the Victoria Police will do.
Yeah.
Right? That's generally unsuccessful. You know, they can try that stuff. And then it and the other side, the Victoria Police, will argue, because that's their job, just like in Nick's case, whinge. That's their job, you know. But the real game that's being played is we're going to make it as hard for you as possible, but eventually we're going to pay you out, right? And I speak to senior police, as I said, and privately, and there's a lot more of these settlements going on than you would believe. There is huge amount of them going on because the Victoria Police have some real problems. They always have.
Yeah.
I'd suggest, I don't know whether it's getting worse or not. I don't know. That's subjective, you know. You have to have data for all this, and it's really hard to come by.
Get that outside the
But
force.
I would suggest that it's getting worse. I think there's indications that it is. And that basically everyone in the police force in any senior position knows this, or even mid-level police know that this is what goes on. And there's an awful lot of money to be made, all right? And I don't play this game, but you could in getting involved in that space. Now, just even as a layperson, you know, sorry, I'm not going to say, if something happens to you, you could do it. I could have done it 1,000,000 times. I've got this, I've had a gun pointed at my head with respect to, with the trigger pulled, right, as part of, in the last 5 years. It's not the first time it's happened, but it's happened in this. I could have sued, like I could have pursued that. But there's something, I don't know, I've asked myself this question. I just deal with things. Right? Now, I actually had about 18 months after that event where, you know, it does affect you, right? But I couldn't look at a cop just when I was going about my business without vibrating with my direct energy weapon, as I like to call it. And they pick up the vibes. The cops, and they, you know, I couldn't stop it happening. Does that make any sense? So that's, sometimes we call this stuff post-traumatic stress disorder, and we put all sorts of labels on it. Now, within myself, I was cool with it. I just noticed it's going on, and I would observe that I'm looking at cops thinking, yeah, you're going to pull a gun on me, mate, you know, and I'm sort of ready to react and stuff. And then it fades away. Now, what a normal person would do, they'd go to a lawyer and sue, and they'd probably get a few $100,000 out of it. Now, I actually did speak to a lawyer about it well after that particular event, and he said, mate, if you were able to bitch and whinge, you know, and complain, and I can't do it for some reason. I tried working on it, but that didn't work. It's just not my nature. And I've asked myself why, I don't know, but we could have sued him for hundreds of thousands of bucks, you know. So, you know, that's just a fact, and I don't. And I've asked myself why, and I think it's because I've been trained. You know, I was a commercial pilot. You know, you're trained to deal with emergencies.
Circumstances prevail.
And you drill, and I was a huge driller. Like, I would drill myself more than most people, but I would also push the boundaries. So I was one of those guys that would get in a high-performance aircraft and fly inverted under a bridge. And I was 19, 20, you know, but I did all that shit as well, and it was great fun. But when you're flying with people on board, of course, that's a whole
CPL.
Hey?
The CPL, job.
Yeah, I've got to see over the airline transport, but right now I've still just got a CPL. And you know, that's where the law. I agree basically with the intention of the law, And maybe in flying, that's a good example, you know.
Yeah.
You want to get from A to B, you want to get there safely. We have acts just like
Yeah.
everyone else. We have rules, VFR, which is visual flight
Yeah.
rules, instrument flight rules, different. You have to approach the problem differently under each of those rules. If you don't, and it happens a lot more than people realise, there's accidents, aircraft hitting a couple of jumbos, you know, just on a basic, simple error in not, you know, just not following a simple rule.
The quadrantal rule.
Hey?
The quadrantal rule.
Yeah.
You're a match penetration.
Are you a pilot or?
Yeah, I'm a trained pilot.
You're still flying? Or?
No, well, not for a couple of years.
Yeah, so you know what the game is, and you know, under IFR there's very strict rules, and that's about separation.
Yeah.
And the pilot's ultimately responsible. That gets confused because you've got air traffic controllers, and sometimes you see pilots not really. It's just the same human stuff. Who's responsible here? I don't really know. Communicate cockpit management. You know, where there's communication between a coach. Yeah, all those human dynamics are present, and it leads to accidents. And in general aviation, there's shit going on all the time.
Oh, yes.
And I get the digest. You probably do as well. And the idea behind that is you read it, and so you can be aware of what happens and don't make the same mistakes, right? So it's the same crap. And then of course, because it's commercial, you've got the corporations law, particularly chapters 5 to 9, because it's a commercial business. And they're listed on the stock exchange, the stock exchange, the airline. It's just endless. And nobody really understands it all, you know. It's just a fact. It does too much. And when you get, and I've had these as well along the way, when you get an outcome like Nick's got, it's just like, forget all that shit. Here's your stuff back. I would have liked to have seen her orders. Would have been interesting just to see, you know, just for me.
Oh, God, I'm on to
that. Because they're probably pretty brief, just I order this, that and the other.
On the actual board order?
It
says, costs not to be paid or something like that, and return of vehicle, quote unquote. And of course that they're not abandoned because I was running out of time.
So pretty brief.
Oh yeah.
Short to the point.
Yeah.
Not much ammo for the other side to whinge about.
Yeah, I know. It was more like just begging that they were doing, you know. It was really like funny just seeing how hopeless they were.
And also how they defer to perceived authority. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah.
That's the mentality of...
See, and they're not used to being the defendant like they were last week. You know, with this
and that's really the crux of this too. There are no authorities. You know,
but they're in a chain of command. They're trained to defer to someone higher. That's the entire training.
Well, that's the paramilitary mindset, but they have a disposition towards that sort of behaviour to begin with, I would argue, right? And the smart ones, who I have seen, really, really lovely people, they leave. And the same thing happens in the corporate world. So a lot of people, you know, I've copped a bit of flack, even vibrationally. I do pick a lot of things up because I've worked in a bank, you know, at a fairly senior level. So people have bad views about banks, which I completely agree with.
No.
And I'll feel that being directed at me, their little directed energy weapon, you know? And because that's what it is, it's vibes, right? And that's cool, you know, I can understand that. But anyone that's any good in the banking system leaves as well. And that's exactly what I did. I got to the top, found out how corrupt it was, and I can tell you some stories. And it was just chronically corrupt. And the fraud is just unbelievable. Unbelievable what goes. I have guys making 200 grand a day that are in my staff. These are my juniors, Jewish, and I'm not anti-Semitic, right? Krongolds and Smorgans, you know, I don't know if anyone's familiar with their very well-known Jewish families. So if you want to get into family feud stuff like the Hanovers and the Habsburgs, which are the Windsors, and all the other players, and the Rothschilds who are pretend, you know, Jews, but they're big players, obviously in the banking world. All this stuff's going on all the way down the chain, and again I'm leading towards don't be judgmental because we can play family feud as well. Right? So if you understand yourself and you can have the guts to look in your own inner world and come to terms with what goes on in your own inner world, you'd be a little bit less judgmental about what's going on right up the top, because it's the only thing they do is they kill a lot more people. You know, a lot more people. They'll take it to that next level, but in their world they don't really worry about that. And I don't personally worry too much about it either, about physical death and stuff.
But as you already said, they're all your teachers.
Yeah, it's a symbiotic relationship. And George has said that, you know, we've all heard the expression, you get the government you deserve.
Yeah.
And that we're asleep at the wheel, that's why we're in, you know, all the other issues people are thinking about, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
We're asleep at the wheel. Is that not what's happening?
Well, Australians deserve all they get.
We've got abuse.
People.
Yeah, we've got abuse of power issues to deal with at a high level if we want to change things. But there's going to have to be some pain inflicted on people before they respond, and that's another life truth as well.
It is.
At a personal level.
All progress comes from
You
suffering.
need a big sledgehammer.
Yep.
Would you agree that your journey's made you a stronger, I'm not going to say the word person?
I'm not sure.
It must have been. It's still alive.
Yeah, I think it forces you to let go of things, and again that comes back to our own inner world. And I'm quite happy to share those, what my inner world is about. I've got nothing to hide. That's why these guys have a lot of trouble with me. But you know, I don't perceive this as being the context for that, because we're talking within a legal forum. But I don't give a shit. And I say to people, if you're too frightened to just go like this, then you're vulnerable, right? To attack. Is that not a fair comment?
Of course.
But you're standing in strength and you're and with honourable tensions, and you're standing on your truth.
I'm not perfect.
No, I'm not saying that. None of us
I
are perfect.
completely admit it. And this is where it gets really weird. I'm well intentioned, and I think most people are. But this stuff causes you to have a look around. But really what's been going on is I've got this little 2-year-old kid coming up. That I thought I'd sort of gotten rid of this stuff, but I found another layer of the onion, and I've expressed this openly to some people. Don't need to go into what it was about. But that shit that early, and you might think this is weird, but it's not. I saw a PhD student recently, and it was actually published in the Herald Sun, talking about some issues, and we're getting to stuff like thought forms now, which is, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but even when you're in the womb, you're picking stuff up. And when I say you, it's the body. Now, this is my paradigm. I don't want to get caught up in semantics. It's the body that feels this stuff. You know, I did bring in a thing with affidavits that I was going to get George to put up on the screen, but it's a can of worms. And it's how affidavits are done professionally. There's some of mine. I've learnt that from what professional law firms do, and I know how to put a proper affidavit. And this is for you too, mate, in case you want that information. I'm happy to give it to you, because you were talking about the possibility of teaching people how to write an affidavit. It's not easy to do it properly. Just the first line, I am the respondent in these proceedings, or I am the applicant in these proceedings, or I am the plaintiff, I am the defendant. I could talk on that one line. This is what I do with affidavits, by the way. One line for about 2 days. The key elements there are I, what is it, right? Lee did touch on this, so she's starting to understand what this is about. What does appear in person actually mean? Now, there's all sorts of ideas on this stuff, but it's a huge subject. And I'll ask a judge this, who do you say appears before you in person?
Do they answer you?
They struggle.
Yeah.
Right? They struggle at times. But I only asked that to a particular... And these guys are senior that I've been dealing with.
Who do you say?
The other thing is I've been pissing myself laughing the whole way through this. I'm going to admit that. It's really funny, but it's also been really painful. Right? It's been really painful as well.
Could it be a coping mechanism because you're in that?
That's correct.
Scenario.
So the worse the pain is, the more I laugh. That's pretty much how it works. Right? When you're in court and the judge, you know how serious it's supposed to be for anyone that's really been playing this game. I've had him literally having to leave so they don't, because they were pissing themselves laughing, or about to, right, with what I was doing with the barristers.
Really?
And it's not cruel or nasty. I just, because I don't have to play their game.
Yeah.
I'm not a licensed
Yeah.
practitioner. I don't hold a practice certificate.
Yeah.
I'm not,
You're not an officer of the court.
Yeah, I'm not an officer of the court.
You're the
correct.
principal.
So I play a little bit of a game,
Yeah.
and and I've given some barristers a real hard time,
Yeah.
and some of these nicely, and some of and the judges, because they're not
They'll
stupid.
love it.
You remember, some of them do. The good ones do.
Because they're sick and tired of the same case
Ah.
coming in and the same boring arguments. You bring something different in and they're like, oh, different.
Well, that's how you get appeals over the line too. You've got to catch the interest of the judge or judges that are going to hear the matter. And there's very technical elements to this, which, again, Darren knows a lot about, and so does Darryl. But I'm trying to stay away from that stuff. So,
can I just say, did you say who do you say is before you?
That's what I say. I'm not suggesting you should say it. This is a very, very deep game at a fundamental level. Right? It's about the creation of your own reality. I don't want to get into, that's a very tricky area.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone.
I mean, I think it's just, just my interpretation is you empowered yourself by your not just your presence, but to let him know that you know.
Yeah, it's a very indirect way, and it's also testing where they're at, because this is my way of reading the bench.
Yeah.
Right, so these guys know they're working. These guys. Look, in some of my cases, I've gone into the court the day before.
Yeah.
The two barristers involved, because there's been 2 or 3 in my case, have had to start ganging up because they couldn't get me, right? They're on the same side in my matter, but sometimes I go in and just watch them because I'm feeling them out.
Yeah.
The day before, they're adversaries, and you've got to remember this, they're working with each other every day.
Yeah.
And the judges, they know each other intimately. And people think, not perfectly, but intimately. And then they're out the back, this is the judges, colluding.
Yeah.
Right, of course they are, having a chat,
This
We're going to drag this case out so we can get our money's worth.
Yeah.
Look, there's elements of that, but again, there's good ones and bad ones. Everyone's got a position. The judge is obliged to do everything they can to see that the matter resolves or settles. All right? That's part of their job, and they rationalise this and all the rest of it. Sorry, mate.
This is just classic example of how hypocritical and disgraceful this bar association legal secret society is, because as you're saying, they're intimately connected to each other, right? And yet you hear guys like Carl Lentz talking about stories where when people like him and his mates go to court, and then the judge, is like, oh my God, these guys are going to steamroll me. I need to get out because I saw him at a barbecue once, you know what I mean? And then they just run, when they just act like they saw a lawyer at the barbecue or whatever, pretending that, because I know him, I shouldn't be involved in this case, I'm going to have to recuse myself and get it out of here and someone else take my place, because they know they're about to get steamrolled, whereas what you're saying,
well, Lionel Murphy, historical matter.
Yeah.
You may be aware of this. It was actually on the ABC, I think, a few years ago. I don't know this. But basically, there was a big furore in Australia. He was a former Labor Attorney General who was promoted to the High Court of Australia. And the dialogue around this issue, and it divided the legal services industry, was this idea that, which they kind of promote anyway, that if you're on the bench anywhere, and particularly the High Court of Australia, given some of the things that they do deal with behind the scenes, you have to drop off all your connections with all your mates. Now, that's the traditional view, right? And you'll hear that issue expressed in that way. There'll be people on the other side, so there'll be, there's 2 arguments. They promote themselves as being an independent, it's an independent judiciary. The concept there is separation of powers, right? So the High Court deals with some really heavy stuff that the Australian public never even hear about, and I know what they are, and anyone can look if you really want to. About a third of it's criminal, a third of it's civil, and it's roughly a third government issues. And, sorry, I'm digressing a bit here, but if you want to take a speeding fine issue to the High Court, you can. And I know people that have done it, right? They've gone all the way. And they'll get a junior to hear it. Sometimes they can get a registrar to hear a matter like that. And, you know, it's just how much brass you've got and whether you want to risk costs, because that's always the deterrent in this game. And they're the last resort. They promote themselves as that, as they're the last resort in Australia to resolve any issue. They have jurisdiction over every other court in the land, which is true. All of the other courts are created out of that power, federal courts, that is. And that's Darryl's argument, there is no jurisdiction other than federal jurisdiction. You've got to be careful with that, because it's not going against anything Darryl says, because there's a lot in these other, and they are valid.
I would disagree with that.
Would you? Yeah.
Because the colonies existed before the Commonwealth, and they had their own Supreme Courts.
Yeah.
And if you read the Cable case, they mention in that the future Commonwealth made agreements with the colonies that would become states, that they would then cross-vest federal jurisdiction to those courts. They existed before. So there's not one jurisdiction, that's not possible.
Yeah, well, I agree with that, and I sort of, you know, you've got to be careful about what you think people are actually saying, but Darren would say that. Darren knows quite a lot about, you guys probably have a good conversation about.
Darren.
Do you know Darren? Yeah, about.
I've seen him once or twice, haven't I?
Jurisdictions, so it basically again comes down to arguments. It's argument. It's Darryl's got a party he's trying to get off the ground, the Great Australia Party. You know, he wants to play in this space, which is fantastic. I hope he can get up there and have a crack, you know. I think he still wants to do that. But that's where he's coming from. And he has a view and an argument. Is that a fair comment?
It is.
It's the same deal.
He does.
It's the same deal, just like the rest of us. So, yeah, all right. So, look, with all the other stuff that's going on, you know, I don't buy into everything that people believe. I'm not saying I'm quite open to being shown to be wrong, or learn something. You know what I mean? With respect to whatever. But I do see a lot of anxiety in people. And fear. And
that's a game.
I just feel like people are... Look, we do have an issue, there's stuff going on, right? Financial reset, bail-in legislation, a lot of people worried about that. And I think there's a lot of people in this circle, maybe not here tonight, that do want to discuss some of those things, probably because they might have properties and bank issues and, you know, well, they have, it's everywhere. It's actually been going on since 2009, but it's been hidden just how many people are in trouble or taking on banks. It's massive. I get the data on that, but people aren't inclined generally to say, you know, this is another problem that happens at all levels. They don't want to tell you about all their failures, because on some level they feel like it's their fault. That's this happens with very wealthy people as well. I've got endless stories about $100 million portfolios ending up $10 million, not through anything. You know, they came to me and because I'm honest, right? I'm not going to promise them shit that, you know, is unachievable. And some idiot at Solomon Smith Barney will, and they believe it. They just blow up with very wealthy people, and it happens a lot. Right? But they don't go to the parties and say, hey, I just lost $90 million, because that's the human thing. Everyone's trying to pretend they've got their shit
squared away.
Yeah, and they have it. Sorry, mate.
Quick question, Ian.
Yeah.
Did you read anywhere that $500 billion had been injected into the New York Stock Exchange by the Fed Reserve?
Yeah.
You did?
I'm aware of it, yeah.
Your take on that is what's going on?
That's never happened in history.
Correct.
The repo rate, you're talking about the repo market, and I don't want to get into too much technical stuff. Again, it's not, the concept should be sufficient. That rate has never varied more than 25 basis points. This is a repo rate.
Repo meaning repossession?
It's really, look, the The mechanism is an overnight mechanism, and it's whereby major banks lend each other cash, right? And the stuff on the other side of that transaction is security, which I'm sure is usually things like government bonds.
Securities.
So there's this sort of, look, because they have to balance their books every night. Now this is the official line, that banks balance their books every night. They don't, right? But in this official game that's played with central banks, that's what they're doing, right? And what happened there was, what that indicates what happened there, the interest rate went to 10%, which it's never done in history. This is back in September last year. And what that tells you, without getting into all the technicals, is the banks are worried that someone's about to go under, right? One of their counterparties, as we call it. Now, this is what happened in 2008 in the States, which is roughly the year they say, the GFC happened. Here it was March of 2009, where our market bottomed at 3,198. That's the All Ordinaries Index. In March of 2009, that was our bottom. Down from about 7.5-ish was the top. So I use that data point to say that's when our GFC kind of, markets hit bottom. There's other markets, of course. And that was what, just to remind you guys, and if I'm telling you stuff that you already know, you need to let me know, that Bear Stearns, some of them collapsed, Lehman Brothers, another one. And what we did in response to that, or the government did, or government Sachs as I like to call them, Goldman Sachs, was they bailed them out with taxpayer money. Does everyone remember that? And the official figure was 700 billion.
That was
right? And does anyone want to hear this stuff or not?
Yeah.
I don't want to
How's
talk.
it relevant to what's happening now?
Sorry?
How's it relevant to what's
Because it's potentially happening
Yeah.
again, and that's why I think Paul's raised that issue, that we have a better understanding at central bank level, inverted commas, and by players in the financial markets of what that means. The $500 billion was injected into that repo market to provide liquidity. You'll hear that term a lot if you start looking at the financial stuff, to stop the collapse of a banking system, because that's what was going to happen.
They're topping the tank up.
Oh, sorry?
They're topping the tank.
Yeah. So the central bank is perceived, and its function is the bank of last resort, right? When everything else gets into trouble. So whatever else about being privately owned and all that, which it is, right? The Federal Reserve is. Forget all that stuff, but they are still basically performing that function to see that the system doesn't collapse. So that they basically bail out the system. Now the question on everyone's mind is which bank, this is what's going on in my world, is at risk. And there'll be, like everything else, there'll be speculation about within that community, the financial service community, about, and this is global, it's not a local.
Well, apparently NHBC was in difficulties.
Sorry?
NHBC was one of the...
HSBC?
NHBC, was it not?
Yeah. I haven't heard that. I've got my own views on who it is.
Oh, okay.
But that relates to some really complex stuff that's very rarely discussed, and that's the derivatives complex.
Right.
And derivatives are a really, 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 really complicated financial instrument used to blow up countries deliberately. And if you want to read a book on that,
The Economic Hitman.
well, that's one I've heard of. I haven't actually read it, but I know of that book. And sorry?
Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yeah, and there's another one written by, and I'll think of his name in a sec, who's working with the CIA. It's publicly available information. They were using derivatives they're used as weapons of war to blow up Russia, right? And that's a fact. It's not disputed, and it's publicly available information, and that's what partially how the USSR was brought down. I'm coming to you. Italy was blown up by Goldman Sachs using derivatives, and the way that came about, this is back, this is how the European Union thing all happened, or the euro dollar. It's a monetary union as well. That's where they want it to go, but they've got a whole lot of countries in Europe all of whom have their own central bank, right? And they're trying to create this union with this currency called the euro. What they want ultimately is a central bank in Brussels, which they've already kind of got set up, and they're trying to get rid of everyone's central bank, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But you do that in a stepped process. So they know, you know, you can't just roll. This plan's been there since just after the Second World War. It's not new. It took them 50 odd years to get the euro currency part of it in the system. You know, these people think over 50, 100, 200 year cycles. Everyone else is thinking 3 score and 10. That's how they do it, right? Yeah, absolutely. These people, sorry I'm around the place a bit, but that's what happened in Euro. Italy was blown up because they couldn't comply with the public debt levels that were required by the treaty to be granted entry into the euro. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's the same old shit. So they engaged Goldman Sachs and this is what you do with derivatives, you manipulate balance sheets. All right? So they look like they're something different to what they actually are. And that's whether it's a public debt, government debt as we call it, personal debt, all that. And this is called financial engineering. And this has gone absolutely insane in the last 30 odd, 40 odd years, just become insane.
Greece never obviously made a good job of theirs.
Sorry?
Greece obviously never made a good
Greece,
job of it.
all these countries, Spain, in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
They've all been sold a line, and so have a lot of super funds. Big, massive super funds have been sold these products with the guys selling them fully knowing they're going to blow up that super fund. And since 2009, and it's out there if you really want to find this stuff, people in the United States in big public funds that pay police and firemen and public servants have been getting letters. This is people that are already retired that are now on half, their pensions have been cut in half because these funds are insolvent. Right? Yeah. I've been travelling the country talking about this in my former life before this shit started, being paid to do it. Yeah. But most people just, it's like, I can't, and I'm sure you guys get this with what's going on now. They can't face, it's like a shock, and my reality is not what I thought it was, and they just roll over. And it's that fact that people just roll over that's how they get away with it. So if you haven't got people that are going to stand up, and this is really what we're talking about here, isn't it? That have got the balls to get in there and stand for something, you're finished. I've thought about this stuff for years. I was always curious about Iraq, I think there's 200 arseholes with guns and 15 million people, what's the problem? But it's that ability to manipulate people using fear. It's that simple.
Ian, it's 9:15. Do you want to take a 15 break?
Well, I've done what I want to just cover those 3 things. Do you want to just answer these 2, and then I'm happy to keep talking about this stuff if people want to, the financial stuff. It's up to you guys. But after a break or whatever.
Yeah, 15-minute break. Answer Thomas.
Yep, sorry.
Have reserve bankers sort of replaced national treasuries? I thought the treasury traditionally was supposed to manage economies and make money, print the money and that. And obviously I'm just saying that the world is being funded by banks, and these reserve banks have been given permission through legal means to be the money producers or whatever. So,
look, that's a big question. What springs to mind is August the 15th, 1971, which you'll be familiar with this date, and that's when Nixon took us off the gold standard, right? Everyone's pretty much heard that. That was technically a default, financial default by the United States. I don't want to get into the technical aspects of this because, there's the corporation, as Darren alludes to with what's going on here, and there's the country, and they're 2 different things. I'm not quite sure how to express that correctly. The corporation went bankrupt. Yes. It was a default. We've had one in Australia as well. Don't think we had it. It's a bankruptcy, basically.
What year was that?
In Australia, I'm not going to say because I'll be guessing, but it's stuff I've looked at a long time ago when I'm trying to understand how the financial system works, which I've been doing for a real long time. I looked at that. So, that was the French president at the time, and I can't think of his name, I always forget.
Mitterrand.
1970s.
Mitterrand, I think.
It was a long name anyway.
Francois Mitterrand.
Francois Mitterrand.
Yeah, it might have been him. He called it, right, and because basically that was Bretton Woods 2 system. I'm trying to cut to the chase on this, right? To answer your question, since that time, aside from something called the petrodollar, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is
another can of worms.
We've had no backing to our currency. At that date, what a note was something you could take to a central bank and have exchanged for gold, right? So the idea was that there was control over how much money could be printed and circulated in the economy, and because it was backed by something that was in limited supply, right? That's the fundamental, basic how the monetary system's supposed to work.
The banks had to have a certain amount of gold for the amount of money that they had.
Yeah, just to try and get to your question, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia was our central bank, right, until this privatisation process took place, which you'll remember that was Keating, and Keating was driving that, or apparently driving. It was actually driven by the shadow government, right? Indeed. That's the bureaucrats that are in power regardless of which party's in power. That's the shadow government, to deregulate the banking system. Now, again, it's an argument whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, right? It was as a result of that deregulation that we really got this shift into this idea of, again, separation of powers and independent central bank, right? So the idea is independent judiciary, independent central bank. The central bank really effectively performs the same functions as the old Commonwealth Bank used to be. It hasn't changed in any fundamental way. All right, the relationship between the Treasury and this is what you're trying to get at. Tell me if I'm not clear enough for you. And the Reserve Bank of Australia. Well, the Reserve Bank of Australia is not privately owned, despite what some people will tell you. The Federal Reserve is, right? The Treasury. What we're talking about Treasury is fiscal policy. We're going to have to get into a little bit of economics, which is Keynesian economics. And we can stimulate an economy by way of printing money, which we can do, right? You know, the central bank, Reserve Bank can do this, and they manage this. So there's a very grey line between, you know, what the question you're asking, and what is Treasury the same as the Reserve Bank? We kind of are the same. The Reserve Bank is the one that makes those decisions, right? Yeah. They provide an annual report to Parliament every year, fully disclosing the balance sheet, right, because they have a balance sheet, everything they've done, so whether they've printed money and, you know, said, or the government might request it, given it to the government, they go spend it and build some roads. That's printing money for the specific purpose of building infrastructure in a country, right? That's called fiscal policy. The other policy is monetary policy, and that's about manipulating interest rates. So that's basically the two things that our central bank does, and their powers are restricted to that basic fundamental function. Does that kind of make any sense?
I'm getting a picture based on history where the banks have pretty much manipulated government so that they can do all this stuff.
Look, they are, believe it or not, they are semi-doing what they're supposed to do, which is be independent and report to Parliament.
They have to.
But behind the scenes, again, like
but they've also been given all this freedom to do things like derivatives and the way that you can work with fiat money, and you know, a lot of irresponsibility has been able to flourish.
It's actually the banks that have done that, not the Reserve Bank. Right? So here's another one that's going to curl with you a bit. It's not the Reserve, the people that are creating the problem and creating all this credit, right, debt, are the major banks. Right? The Reserve, they're the ones doing it. They're filling the books. It's off-balance sheet vehicles, as they're called. These are accounting stuff. So when they report to the public, because they're a listed entity with shareholders, that stuff's crap.
Yeah.
right? And the analysts, inverted commas, I mean, I've watched this every cycle, right? The analysts will value that stock at say $60, whatever, say one of the banks, right? And all the way down to the bottom to $10, where I already know it's going to go, right? The analysts are justifying their decision, and the problem is they're basing their analysis on what the banks provide them, right? The banks are the ones giving the market this alleged information, but what they're not doing is looking at all the what we call off-balance vehicles, which don't have to be reported on. That's how they get around the regulations and the statutes in terms of their reporting requirements. And they also play with derivatives, which, as I've alluded to before, are extremely complex, where you can manipulate things to look like something that they're not. And ASIC are dumb, right?
Useless.
They are utterly useless. They've made some effort since, again, the GFC, and I have to say they've made an effort, right, to get themselves up to speed. But the problem is the banks are always way ahead, and they're still way ahead now. They're doing things that, you know, it's like big data and stuff, you know. That's what's sitting behind all this technology that you guys are worried about. I was involved in that 20 years ago. It only became public, in the public mind, probably in the last 10, maybe. But, you know, there's huge financial interests, huge, massive global finance. People are so excited they're nearly creaming their jeans. This is 20 years ago, about the control, right? That's the control freaks, right? It's a certain mindset. And it's very appealing for people that are stuck in their logical mind. Fuck, we'll know everything about everything. Even Google guys have said that, you know. They want to become God, basically. You know, the equivalent of God, that every piece of data and information on the planet, and they'll be able to manipulate it, right? That's the scary part, right? So I'm heading into esoteric stuff here again, because that's really where the understanding is.
But that's where they manipulate the system. It's your smartphone and your smart TV and your smart meter outside, and the people that's got them are not so smart, because we're in ignorance of what they already know, and the patterns and analytics that's obviously drawn down by, you know, the data that they've got. They know exactly, you know, the game.
They do, but there's was there another call?
Yeah.
And then we'll have a break, yeah?
Yeah. So, like with the bank guarantee,
the
Australian bank guarantee, is that fireproof or not?
Well, it's $250,000 per account. I think that's what's, so you can have 4 accounts, that means $1 million. APRA, which is the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, and I know quite a bit about them, are responsible for administering any problems we have, and I can't remember the name of the act, so it's some emergency thing. Now the problem is, and I've had a personal experience with this as well, the problem is that the banks can go like that to the government anytime they want. And people don't realise this. I had federal court orders ordering a financial institution to provide certain information in one of the things I was dealing with, and they just go, no, I'm not giving it to you. Right? So people think that just because a court orders somebody to do something, they're going to, no, they're not. No, they don't have to. And then what's going to happen? You know, this federal court or whatever, you know, they're going to take on the bank, are they? No, they're not. And this is where the bluff game comes in again.
Yep.
You know, it's just total garbage. So the banks will protect their own interests, period. Period.
Yeah.
All right? So what they have done is vary their terms and conditions, and that's been happening over the course of 2019 with respect to, it only infers that there's a relationship between, in terms of the variance of their terms and conditions, it only infers that there could be a connection between that and this government guarantee thing. And because it's being administered by the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, what's that? It's a government institution, is it not? Guess who pays them?
The banks.
The banks.
Banks.
Yeah.
So we've always got this conflict of interest. You can really hang on this stuff, but wherever you look, there's a conflict of interest
Yes.
everywhere between all regulatory bodies, all industry bodies, including the Victorian Legal Services Board and Commission, or all their equivalents. You can harp on that, but I read their balance sheet, right? This is what the Victorian Legal Services Board Commissioner's Office, or their equivalents anywhere in the country. I pick up their annual report and I look at it, not because I'm interested, but because I'm really not. I'm not an accountant. I'm a trained economist. And a few other things. But I can do accounting because it's not hard. Anyone can teach yourself. You can teach yourself easy. This is the other problem we have. I've got to go and have someone to teach me. I've taught myself accounting, economics, philosophy, psychology. I'm not blowing my own trumpet, and this is not coming from a place of ego, but some of the top psychologists who are my clients have literally said to me, you know more about our field than I do. Right? That's what they've said. And these people with 40 years experience, and I can tell you right now, they don't understand metaphysics. Right? And what's another thing that's really interesting is people that are into the mind, the limbic system and the whole materialist view of the body.
Physical.
They're always really materialistic people. This is something I've noticed. And the quantum physicists, the guys that are into the study of, the more esoteric things, they're all Platonists. And I've seen that trend. That's Plato and the Platonic solids and sacred geometry and all those sort of things. They're the guys that know what's going on. And they're far less materialist in their view. And people look at them and say they're,
silly.
They're silly and scientists and that. We do have lots of dumb scientists. We always give Nobel Peace Prizes to useful idiots. I mean, that's all rigged as well. And some of the economists have got them. They're just dummies, and they mislead the public on all things. And we've got some really good guys here in Australia. Professor Steve Keane, who's from Melbourne University, is now in London. But the reason that guy's got something extra is because he had a life before he went to school. And, he's got streetwise, like a lot of people in this room, and I've got streetwise as well. I got that from how I grew up. And whereas a lot of these people just come into academia and they've never had exposure to anything else. And all the guys I was working at with the bank, but not all, but 98% of them are all Scotch college boys and come from well-to-do families, and they've never had any other real life experience. And that they're the ones that shit themselves when things go wrong.
Someone with a double degree grabbed a backpack instead of a parachute when a plane was going down.
Sorry, what was that?
Someone with a double degree grabbed a backpack instead of a parachute when the plane was crashing.
That could happen, and we don't want to. We've got a lovely young lady who's got a double degree, and she's no sausage, but they do things like trying to change a spare wheel, and this is a true story of a Monash uni guy. I don't know whether you read it. He's trying to get the hubcap off with a can opener, right? So he can change the wheel nuts. Now, it is funny, right? I'm not. These guys are really clever in their areas, but common sense, uncommon sense, it just doesn't exist. And medical doctors are the same, and that's a whole other subject. They're trained monkeys, right? And a lot of people, I've set up businesses here in Victoria, Peninsula Health, if anyone's in, you might be familiar with it, and in London. And this is in the radiology area, so I've worked closely with these guys, and they were setting up a business where they were privatising those services. And radiologists are the guys that they have a medical degree, then they specialise in, MRIs and taking pictures of people and reporting on them. You know how much that all costs now, it's a racket. Right? These guys, what they're good at is towing the line and not rocking the boat. That's all they do. That's all they do. Yeah, they're trained monkeys, and people, they cannot think for themselves. Now, I'm generalising, because there's really good ones that step outside that paradigm. They are there, but they're a minority. And there's a word for them, where they've just gone, nah, bugger this. So they've got all the traditional training, but they've also got the alternative view, and they're really amazing. I know some really good ones. But most of them, they can't think. They literally can't
A
think.
lot of professional type lawyers,
Yeah,
when they're at law school,
yeah.
are taught, they're not taught to think about the things. They're said, it's this, and it's this. They don't question it.
Yeah, that's right.
Then they know what they have to do to pass the exam. They get a degree and they go away.
Mm.
They're good at
You get them.
regurgitating.
And you try and speak to them in some form of a
Yeah.
backwards and forwards and discuss legal concepts.
Yeah.
You might as well talk to them in French.
Yeah, well, they're pretty sick, some of those people too. They are sick.
And the
And,
majority of them coming out with a law degree, and I've had this experience a million times, I love them.
Mm.
They come in very arrogant. As soon as I meet the arrogant ones, I'm like, yes, thank you very much. They come in, they're arrogant, they're wearing their suit, and you say to them, well, look, I don't know why you're here, because your case is not, it's not viable, it's not this, it's this. And what's the first thing they do? They talk down to you.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
right.
well, I'm a lawyer and you probably don't understand.
Yeah.
It's like, well, so you explain it to them and they won't listen.
Mm.
So you go into a courtroom, they get flogged, you come outside, they say to you, what was that all about?
Yeah.
Well, I tried to tell you outside that you wanted to be a dickhead, didn't you? I said, you learned the hard way, and I'm not going to tell you now. Bye. And I like them. But, you know, I'm in law school again, and I listen to the things that they're teaching. Right? We had one lesson on constitutional law. I wanted to punch the guy.
Yeah.
He was trying to describe the Australia Act and what it did. He got that wrong, and he mentioned the Supreme Court of the UK that didn't even exist in 1986.
Oh.
Then we're listening to contract, and instead of an offer to treat, the guy used offer to deal, and I thought, I'm actually from WA originally. I thought, well, maybe that's the term they use here. It's a California term, and the guy's an American lecturer,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
right?
Yeah.
No one in the room asks a question.
Well, that's a problem.
See, they get programmed with shit.
Yeah,
Mm.
They believe in shit.
yeah,
They get the next layer of shit.
yeah.
Then the next layer. Then they go out into the real world. They get into
They're
a
full of
court.
shit.
All they know is shit.
Yeah.
And they're full of shit.
Well, I think a lot
Exactly.
of them are very cunning. I mean, like a lot of lawyers actually prefer the client to lose because they don't have to confront the taxing master. They get 100% of their costs. If you lose, if you win, you know, the taxing master will take
That's not
shave
what
20,
taxation.
30% off their bill.
That's not what taxation of
No,
costs
no, it's
is.
a taxing master. It's the
A
cost
ta-
court.
a
It's
taxing-
a court thing.
A taxing
Either way,
master
lawyers
is
go onto the bar.
a taxing master is an officer of the court who taxes the costs.
Yeah, correct. But if
And
you
hang on
win,
a second. Taxation of costs is where the court goes through the entire bill of costs to make sure that the lawyers have not overcharged and that everything's correct because the court
yeah,
makes an
I understand
order.
that. But if you lose, they pay 100%. But if you win, the lawyer only gets 70 or 60%.
Yeah,
speaking-
but that game I've bumped into as well, which you can hassle lawyers on that. But again, you know, you can take the Supreme Court, you know, if it's a lawyer in Victoria, it's a hugely complex
Yeah.
area,
Yep.
and very expensive, and it's the same game, all right? Don't complain or you're
Yeah.
going to pay.
Yep.
Lawyers
That's-
are terrified of the
That's the
taxing
game.
master.
Don't complain about anything,
Yeah.
or we'll just suck you dry. You know, that's the game.
Yeah.
Unless you're absolutely certain about what you're doing. You know, with this,
I don't go to court if I'm
have an
not certain.
assessment done. But what the courts do a lot now is they just say they make the lawyers go with a standard scale. That will happen in court settings where, you know, to avoid, if they feel that, you know, whatever, they'll just say, no, standard court scale for costs, work out your costs on that, make your cost application, whatever, and, you know, because it's, I don't know, it's just a can of worms everywhere, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they've made it so complex, but so is the Tax Act. You know,
Yeah,
everything we
Tax
do
Act.
with tax is just completely unnecessary.
Have you ever seen the AGS trying to debate tax in the federal court?
No.
Yeah.
I've had the ATO,
Neither have they.
I've had an argument between the judge
They don't know what they're talking about.
and the ATO,
Mm.
the Commissioner's representative. And this is another thing about, sorry, I've just got things popping into my head, the Interpretation of Legislation Act, for example. And this is where, well, we'll probably have touched on this is where it comes down to the meaning of words.
Right.
And the judge don't know either. So you'll hear, and I've had this conversation, I'm very conversational in my approach when I'm in court. You know, I'll just very, you know, have a bit of a chat, whatever. And the judge say, well, that's not how I read it. Right? And it's going back to the same thing. It's totally subjective in terms of what it actually means. And you can argue anything. So all these parties are going into court and they're all trying to figure out what it really means.
That's what they
Nobody really knows. Right? That's the fact, right? So all these people think all this stuff's about certainty, because that's what humans want too. We want to feel we're in a dangerous world. We want to feel that there's some certainty about things, you know, and it's very easy to sell certainty even when you're certainly wrong.
You're going to set a poker table, basically.
But the Commission doesn't know. But you can get into some real heated arguments about it. But, you know, ka-ching, 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 you know. Who's benefiting? And don't think the judges don't know that. They don't want, you know, no one wants to... That's why regulators roll over. Because they also don't have the funds to take on a big bank. That's why banks just go like that. We've got endlessly deep pockets. So and I've been in those roles, in various roles, where you've just got to massage a thing to try and get the banks to behave. Because at the end of the day, they're running the world. Used to be the government, and before that it was the priesthood. But you just look at who's got the biggest buildings, sort of thing, you know. And right now it's corporates and banks.
You know, it's amazing. People think they're going to go to court by themselves and they're going to beat the bank. Banks are the ones that roll armies out to take out nations. They can afford better lawyers than we can ever get.
Yeah, that's true, but it doesn't mean you can't beat them.
No, it doesn't mean you can't.
So, but I hear what you're saying. You don't compete on who can spend the most.
No, but you're dealing with the most ruthless element you're going to meet. It's not the CIA.
No.
It's the banksters.
Yeah, if you're not prepared, if you don't realise that you can be killed in every way, but physically by playing this game, you're a dickhead. We're not online, are we? No. You're a dickhead. Period. And it's really difficult
call
to
it right.
Know thy enemy.
You know what I'm talking about.
Know thy enemy.
Yeah.
Maybe we should call
And
it
preferably you just find a way not to play, or you know.
You know what I mean?
Anyway, is everyone? Yeah, we're gonna have a break. I think.
Yeah, we're going to have a break.